Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Strait Science. Strait Science is an evening seminar series put on by University of Alaska Fairbanks Northwest Campus in Nome, as well as University of Alaska Fairbanks Alaska Sea Grant here in Nome. And tonight we've got a large number of speakers that are going to give us a very interesting presentation on the Action project. And I've already got a link to that. I'll throw in once we get underway for the opener so everybody can dive in there. And so leading off tonight, we have Kay McMonigal, a UAF research assistant professor. Is that right? Yes. At the University of Alaska.
Professor, yep.
Oh, assistant professor, excuse me, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks College of Fisheries and Ocean Science. And their team, which we will hear from following, is Matthew Balazs, who is a UAF research assistant professor and deputy director of the Alaska Coastal Cooperative. Charla Koozaata, who's representing the native village of Gambell and is a community research lead at Gambell. Morgen Bertheussen with McGill University as a PhD candidate, and they are talking to us tonight from Montreal, Quebec. So think of the time difference. Morgan, you get extra points for just starting off at 10 o'clock at night or 10:30 at night for your presentation. We have Jackie Beight, a UAF PhD student. Jessica DePaolis, a postdoctoral fellow at University of Alaska Fairbanks. And hopefully tuning in will be Alex Zoarchi, representing native village of Atka down in the Aleutians as a community and is a community research lead for this project. So we did see SIKULIAQ come to the dock several times this year, and one of them was to bring home a lot of the crews, a lot of the PIs here that were traveling from the Gulf of Alaska up through Aleutians, on into central Bering Sea, into the northern Bering Sea, Bering Strait region, and we'll hear more about their whole cruise and then what they did at Gambell before they came to Nome. And this is a large project with a lot of moving parts, and so we'll hear all about it as soon as I sign off. So with that, we'll start off with Kay McMonigal. We're so glad you're here, and we really want to hear about the Action Cruise and what happened on SIKULIAQ this summer from your whole project, Gulf of Alaska to Canada, but especially we're interested in the Bering Strait region, of course. Thank you so much. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Gay, and thanks everybody for being here. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the Action Project Convergence Research Cruise, and this is part of the Alaska Coastal Cooperative. We're really thinking about this as a community-first approach to climate resilience. Let me go forward. Gay already gave a little bit of an intro, but just wanted to give people a chance to introduce themselves. So Chris Mayo is a professor at UAF, and he's the director of the Alaska Coastal Cooperative. He's not speaking tonight, but he's really kind of the lead of all of this. And then I'm Kay McMonigal. I'm an assistant professor also at UAF. I'm here in Fairbanks, and I do a lot of seagoing research. Matthew, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I could speak a little bit. Yeah, so I'm a research assistant professor within the Geophysical Institute here at UAF, and I serve as the deputy director for the Alaska Coastal Cooperative. And I'll just take this opportunity to, spell out like, while these are the speakers here tonight, this cruise and the Action Project has a lot of different characters, and there's fingerprints and personalities all over these slides. So just a shout out to the entire team here.
Awesome. Thanks, Matthew. And we're hoping Charla Koozaata can join. She's not on quite yet, but maybe she'll get a chance. She was on the cruise with us, and she's a community research lead with the native village of Gambell. So hopefully she gets on and can tell you some about what we did in Gambell. And And Alex Zayuchny, we're also hoping is able to join. He's the community research lead with the native village of Atka. He was also out on this cruise with us. Morgan, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Morgen Bertheussen, and I'm based in Montreal, Quebec. I'm a health geographer, so I'm really interested in what makes people and communities healthy and well, and how we can kind of uplift those when we think about how landscapes are changing. So I'm really happy to be here tonight.
Jess, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. My name is Jessica DePaolis, and I am a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, based in Fairbanks, with the Geophysical Institute.
And last but not least, Jackie.
Hi, I'm Jackie Beight, and like was said before, I'm a PhD student at UAF, and I focus mainly on physical oceanography in the Bering region. Um, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and just echoing what Matthew said, this was really collaborative, the whole cruise, and then putting together the slides as well. There's a lot of input from many different people, some of whom are speaking tonight and some of whom are not. All right, I'll hand it over to Matthew.
Yeah, so we thought we'd start off with a little bit of the background of the Alaska Coastal Cooperative. So, because this is a newer organization, we were founded in 2022, so shortly after the pandemic, and our startup of the cooperative really was stemmed from some support from the Vice Chancellor of Research and the Vice Chancellor of Indigenous Studies here at UAF. So that was after that seed funding, we hit the ground running looking for different funding mechanisms, and the action project is our first like test case. But in general, I did want to highlight what the ACC stands for. And, what we'd like to say is we have three main pillars of the cooperative. And that the first one is to improve the communication. There's a lot of different stakeholders that are working within our coastal communities, ranging from the communities themselves, federal agencies, universities, etc. And we've all like heard too many stories of efforts that are being duplicated and resources that are just not being coordinated very well. And so the very first pillar is to try to serve as some sort of matchmaking entity where we can understand what's going on in the local communities, understanding what the priorities of the communities are, and trying to do our part to kind of like facilitate exchanges. If there's a particular group of federal agencies that's working on one particular subset that's useful to a community to make those connections where they might not have existed before. And there's a couple examples here later in the slides that we can get into on that. The second one is to advance the sciences, and specifically that's applied sciences. So we're really trying to underscore the need to do science that directly impacts each of the community's priorities, rather than just doing science for science's sake, which is nothing wrong with that. It's just for our particular motivation within the cooperative, we do put a heavy emphasis on applied science that directly benefits the communities that we're working in and with. And then the last pillar is to enhance the workforce development education opportunities that's happening within the communities. That's by far a universal ask and request when we are working with communities, is to engage with the youth and to help with any sort of workforce development opportunities. So we'll get into a little bit of how that on-the-ground training kind of fits into this research cruise here itself. And we can go to the next slide here, Kay. And so, like I said, this action project, the ACTION is an acronym for the Alaska Coastal Cooperative for Co-producing Transformative Ideas and Opportunities in the North. It was, in all honesty, we tried to fit the words into the acronym ACTION because we thought that was a very powerful acronym to use for our project. It really embodied the spirit of what we're trying to do. We want to, be proactive in the work we're doing and have some action. But at any rate, so this project is it's funded through the Navigating the New Arctic program within NSF. We are, I believe, the very last project or the cohort of projects that were funded through the Navigating the New Arctic program before it sunsets. And in a lot of ways, we're hoping that we can kind of embody like a capstone type of project within that program to kind of underscore what it's like, a good way to do research in the Arctic. And specifically, we're really centering the process on co-production, exchange of knowledge. This project is really unique in that in the first year, we had what we called our visioning process, where we really just worked with each other to understand what the priorities of the communities were before we actually started the research. And this research cruise really came out of that co-produced process of understand what the needs of the communities are. Real quickly, I'll just mention we do have 12 community partners on this project, including the 5 in the Chiknik Intertribal Coalition: Chiknik Bay, Chiknik Lagoon, Chiknik Lake, Perryville, and Ivanhoe Bay. We're also working with Nelson Lagoon a little further down on the peninsula, Atka, St. Paul, Hooper Bay, Gambell, Point Lay, and Tuktoyaktuk. That's in the Northwest Territories of Canada. And this cruise visited a number of these communities, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Okay, next slide. And then the last thing I want to note is, just kind of like to underscore once again that this project really, the central focus of it is the process of co-production. And so throughout this presentation, and even in the name of the cruise itself, we landed on the term convergence. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here right now, but really just it embodies the process of co-production. So, understand what the priorities of the community is, a starting point, but then matching the expertise within the project team to address those priorities, and understanding like where else we can pull from other resources outside of the project. Really, it's just a holistic approach to doing research. So I guess with that, I'll hand it over, I believe, back to Kay here to talk a little bit about the cruise itself and how it came to be.
Yeah, so like Matthew mentioned, this cruise was one part of this bigger action project, but I think it was really cool and it brought together a lot of different components of the project. And what the cruise looked like is it was a 16-day cruise. We started in August in Seward, and then we went down to Chignik Bay and down the Aleutians all the way to Atka, and then headed north in the Bering Sea, doing some work near St. Paul and Hooper Bay and Gambell, and then finally coming into Nome, I think around about August 8th or 9th. So you might have seen the SIKULIAQ in Nome around then. And we really wanted this cruise to embody those 3 pillars that Matthew talked about. So we wanted to enhance communication between different groups. We wanted to do some applied science, and we wanted there to be a workforce development component. And so there were a couple things that were really unique about this cruise. And one thing is just who was on the cruise. We really intentionally had a very broad group of people, including Western scientists, social scientists, different indigenous knowledge holders, students. We had a documentary filmmaker, so there should be a documentary film coming out of this at some point. And then other groups. And really, we wanted all these people to be able to talk to each other and share knowledge and learn things in both directions. Actually, not even both directions, in all directions, really. I learned a ton from social scientists as well. And the cruise was really centered around 3 community visits. So again, this is something that was pretty unique. I go out on a lot of cruises on ships like SIKULIAQ, and you tend to leave port and then you're just out at sea doing your science and you go back into port. But we did something different, and in Chignik Bay, Atka, and Gambell, we actually had people get off of SIKULIAQ and go onto land. So in Chignik Bay and in Atka, we were able to pull up to the docks. In Gambell, there's not a dock there. We took small boats to transport people from SIKULIAQ onto the beach. And when we were in those communities, we did science both in the area of the community on SIKULIAQ, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And we also did some kind of land-based sampling as well. And again, we'll talk about that more in a minute. And in between, we had some transit days. So if I go back to this map, it takes a while to get, say, from Atka up to St. Paul or Hooper Bay. And so during those transit days, we were going through different educational modules and hands-on learning to learn from each other. And we did some science activities during that transit as well. And our goal really was to have knowledge sharing happening both through structured activities and then also just from getting to know each other during our free time on the ship. It's pretty cool. We were spending a lot of time together doing work and also just, over lunch and going out and looking at the ocean and talking about what we saw. All right, I think I'm going to hand it back to Matthew for this.
Morgen, but close
Oh,
enough.
sorry, Morgen.
All good. Yeah, thanks, Kay. Both Kay and Matthew have been talking about, convergence and how our group and the work that we're doing is centered around this idea of convergence or co-production. And so while it's a word that's central to what we do, it's not so obvious as to what it means. So really what it comes down to is this idea that we're working together across disciplines and knowledge systems. And it's making sure that, both Indigenous and Western knowledges, social scientists and physical scientists, academic and non-academic research partners all have their space at the table and in the field. So in that way, this process of convergence research shapes the way that we conduct research, but also it makes sure that what we do and how it's shared is culturally relevant. So next slide, please. So with the foundation of this cruise being convergence, everyone in the team and everyone on board the SIKULIAQ had a role to play to make sure that we were able to learn from each other across the different disciplines, cultures, and knowledges that were on board. So we took part in several different learning modules, and each of them were led by different team members. So on the slide here, you can see that, there were modules centered around governance and storytelling, as well as on sediment coring and sediment sampling and oceanography. We also had the chance to do some biological sampling, which basically means that we had some nice fishing time as well on board the cruise. And so what each module has in common is that they were really focused on learning by doing and actually applying what we were learning in the classroom and getting hands-on experiences. And so today during our talk, we're going to go over a few of these modules, but please feel free at the end to ask questions about any of those that might have piqued your interest. So next slide, please. So one of the modules that we're going to be talking about today is the methods of braided surveying, which took a collaborative approach to research design and collecting data. And so the goal of this module was to apply this concept of convergence by using different survey tools and techniques during the community visits in Atka, Chignik Bay, and Gambell. And here the braided approach represents the different disciplines and knowledge systems that were involved throughout the modules. So the physical sciences, the social sciences, and the Indigenous and local knowledge. Next slide. So in this module, there was really 3 phases that were repeated for each community visits. The first one was a pre-planning phase that was held on board the SIKULIAQ while we were in transit to the communities. And so this pre-planning meeting was led by the community research lead of the community that we were heading to. And the goal of this meeting was for the community research lead to share their insights about their community to the team and talk about areas that are important to community members and talk about the different change that's happening. And this was useful for team members who had never been to this area to have a bit of an idea of the place before they set foot on land. And so through this pre-planning meeting, we were able to identify what relevant survey tools we would be able to use during our shoreside visit, and we were also able to plan data collection collaboratively. The data collection took place on shore, and it was guided by the community research leads or community members. And so while we were collecting data, it was also a space where folks could share observations, stories, and conversations. And it became a way to explore the different meanings and experiences of places and how they're changing. Once data was collected, we all came back on board the SIKULIAQ and in transit had some group discussions that were less so focused on the actual data we collected, or to some degree, but also very much focused on the process of convergence itself. So how we could best work together to answer local priorities as a team. I'll now hand it over to Matthew to give some examples of what we actually did during this module.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. Like Morgan was saying, each one of these community visits really stemmed from understanding what the local priorities were of what type of data should be collected in each community. And we're really fortunate in our case that we've had long-standing relationships with most of our communities that are on the project. So in Chicnic Bay, for example, we've been doing community-based monitoring, looking at collecting water depth or bathymetry data throughout the watershed for the last couple of years. And through that process, we heard from the community that there was a desire to understand what's going on at a very popular fishing lake that's over by the airport. It's landlocked, so it doesn't have any access to the ocean, so we haven't done the bathymetry until then. So during this convergence cruise, we took the opportunity to actually collect the data using one of our skiffs that we use throughout the research cruise. And so the goal of this is to engage with as many community members as possible to understand what the significance of the lake was. And that's the name of the lake. It's the lake. And so through that process, we did engage with community members to get some oral history, as well as to actually gather the quantifiable data like water depth. And so that was a really, I guess, fun exercise. It was an entry into this process and trying to make it relevant to the community here of Chicnic Bay. We'll go ahead and skip to ATCA here for the sake of time here, Kay. Great. And then in ATCA, very similar set of circumstances. So we've been working with ATCA for a number of years now, and during those years, we've collected cross-shore profiles, looking at the rates of erosion that are impacting different parts of the community. So we knew going in that was part of the research plan, was to continue the data collection to get a long-term collection to look at rates on an annual basis. But we also have been hearing a lot about the reindeer harvest and the reindeer management strategies that ATCA has been employing. So during this braided surveying module, we took the opportunity to join Alex and several other folks from our cruise on a reindeer hunt. So Alex has been wanting to use UAS or drones for reindeer counts for quite a while now, and there was a question of whether that would be even feasible in the terrain. So through engaging with the hunt and understanding exactly what the topography is looking like and where the reindeer actually come together, we were able to actually understand firsthand like what that process looks like and what that looks like on a daily, weekly basis for Alex. So we did not use the drone for the hunts. That's very important to say. That would be illegal. So we were very careful not to do that, but we did bring the drones as kind of a proof of concept. So after the hunt, we were able to launch the drones and try to look for the reindeer herds. Unfortunately, the fog rolled in, so it was kind of a bust on the survey front. But it underscored the fact, understand what the priorities were in the community and trying to see what we can use as far as our tool set goes to address those priorities. And then lastly, one last thing I'll mention here on ATCA is that, the whole applied science and the workforce development initiatives, it can be underscored with this drone survey. So Alex, as a coach, he took a number of classes through our project looking at how to actually fly drones. So this was a really great opportunity to have hands-on experience on flight planning and flying the drones in the field. So it was kind of like a culmination of the year and a half long process that he was going through as far as learning how to use UAS. Okay, and then the last example that I'll just mention briefly is up in Gambell. There was some initial work that was done looking at the topography and the rates of erosion that was happening in different parts of the spit and peninsula that it sits on. But there was a gap in the data, so we were actually able to use our UAS-based LiDAR sensor to do a scan of the community to have a really great baseline data set for future years. And then we also used our same exact bathymetry collection methods that we did in the Chicknicks as kind of a proof of concept for Gambell. So between the bathymetry that the SIKULIAQ was able to collect and the bathymetry we were able to use on the skiff, we're starting to build up a nice data set that will help inform any sort of flood surge modeling and other flood inundation maps that are going to be produced here going forward. So this is a brief overview of some of the types of data that we're collecting through this module. And I'll hand it back over to, I think.
Yeah, Morgan, do you want to say something about the community visit to ADCA, or you want me to say something?
Sure, I can share a few words and then please fill in any blanks I leave out. But in each community, when there was a party doing, the methods of braided surveying module and also collecting other types of data, but everyone on board the SIKULIAQ, that includes also the crew, were participating in different activities that were taking place. So in ADCA, folks headed over to Corvin Beach on the other side of the island where there's the culture camp. And so it was really foggy and rainy that day, but there was some nice game playing and relationship building that was going on. And we also had a community potluck that was held in ADCA during our visit.
Yeah, I'll just add in, there's this picture in the bottom left. Well, maybe not all of us, but a lot of people tried eating a sea urchin right out of the ocean in ADCA, and that was pretty cool. A lot of people had never tried it, and just reactions of sharing different foods was pretty interesting. And then there was also this like giant squid washed up on the beach, which I don't think is normal at all, but people were very, very interested in seeing that. And one of the things we did in ATCA, I'm going to show you a little movie, but Alex, who's our community research lead, told us that there was this area that there was this underwater reef because there were all of these, rocks and all of this, but nobody had ever looked at it. And so we actually went out on a skiff and took a remotely operated vehicle, an ROV, and got some footage of what the seafloor looks like there. And definitely it looks like there's a cold water reef. This is about a minute worth of the video, but we have like 40 minutes just driving around, and it really confirmed he knew that there was a reef right there, and we were really able to get some footage of it, and kind of confirm too, you would not want to take a big ship like SIKULIAQ in this area because there were all kinds of hazards sticking up at relatively shallow depth, not marked on any maps. And then I can say a little bit, we also did a community visit in Gambell. So these are a number of photos Charla sent me. I think she sent me like 150 photos on Facebook, and I picked out some of them to show you. But some of the things we did on the community visit in Gambell is we went on a seal hunt that was not a successful seal hunt, but we had a couple boats out seal hunting. We also, in all of these communities, actually had community members who were able to go on SIKULIAQ and get a tour of the ship. So these are a few kids, I think, right after they got back from their tour of SIKULIAQ. They got to see the different parts of the ship and the different ways we collect science. And then we also had a community barbecue with some dancing after it. And then I have a little video. One of the science activities we did in Gambell and some other regions was to deploy wave buoys. And this is Charla throwing the wave buoy off of SIKULIAQ. And Jackie will mention those more in a little bit, but we have some wave buoys that are still out in the water collecting data on waves right now. Jess, do you want to take over?
Sure. So yeah, Kay mentioned earlier that there was a lot of time in between our community visits, time in which we were sailing along and needed things to do. And some of the activities were very community-based or community engagement, I guess, and sharing knowledge and sharing kind of cultures. And JJ Orloff, who's our community research lead for the Chignik Intertribal Coalition, created this wonderful module where she taught us beading and how to sew beaver fur headbands and how to make different types of earrings, including ones with salmon skin. So we had a really, really wonderful time first learning how to actually create these beautiful crafts, and then also just finding our own free time to chat and be together and to have time kind of talking and learning from each other. So it was a really wonderful module, one for the sharing of this knowledge, but then also to just have the time with others on the ship. So I really thought it was a great module that you created. Okay, next slide. Okay, I want to talk about some of the sampling efforts that we had during the cruise. Next slide, please. These included onshore sampling. There was sediment coring that happened offshore while we were on the water in the SIKULIAQ, and that happened off the boat. And then there was also harmful algal bloom sampling, and this was using this instrument called the IFCB on the ship. And I'm going to talk in detail about each one of these. So let's first talk about the onshore sampling. Next slide. Onshore sampling happened in Atka and in Gambell, and the onshore sampling was brought to us during kind of before the cruise. We heard about some interest in sampling water and sediment in a few different sites from our CRL, Alex Zeochne, and he was concerned about some sites that had some contaminants and had at least in the past, some contaminants, and they were wondering if these contaminants were persistent. So our job was to go onshore and identify these locations that Alex was concerned with and sample soil and water. So we did this over a full day. There was a few of us that went out, identified the sites, took the samples, and bagged them up. Because of these efforts, someone else on the ship who was from the native village of Gambell was interested in similar sampling techniques to happen onshore in Gambell. So this wasn't pre-planned, but because of the efforts that they saw in Atka, they thought that it would be positive for Gambell to have similar sampling done. So that was another place where we actually ended up identifying some sites where contaminants might be there, and then actually doing the water and soil sampling. So that has been sent off to research labs so that they can run analyses to actually check for certain contaminants that are of most concern. So I thought that was a really awesome kind of on the fly like change of plans, but for the positive that we had during the cruise for sure. Next slide, please. So then I want to talk now about offshore sampling. So this was core sampling. We had two different forms of sampling sediment on the ocean floor using core equipment. The picture on the left is showing our multi-core, and it takes multiple cores in one deployment. And this is us getting a kind of preview of how it works. And I guess you could consider it like a training session. We were being trained on the equipment, and it was sort of recruiting people that might be interested in how it works to actually help us when we were ready to deploy it. The middle picture is showing us actually deploying this multi-core, and it takes these multiple cores of about 1/2 meter or like a couple feet long. So not a ton of sediment, but it's definitely helpful to get kind of the shallowest sediment that there is in the ocean floor. And then that third picture on the far right is some people from the ship actually helping to cut the core and sample it and kind of prepare it to be archived so that someone in the future can look for these, I don't know, ask for access to these cores and actually sample it and run whatever analyses that they want from the sediment. So this is some of the examples of offshore sediments coring that we did. Next slide. And then the last type of sampling that we had was water sampling. This is again through this, it's for harmful algal blooms, and this is using the IFCB. The IFCB is an imaging flow cytobot, and that is located on the ship. And really simplified, what it does is it takes in water from off the ship, it samples it, and it actually photographs everything that it sees in that sample. So it's looking for really microscopic things, any type of phytoplankton that it might see. And harmful algal blooms are caused by some types of phytoplankton. And so it's actually looking through the phytoplankton and can identify some of the harmful algal blooms. This was one of these components of importance for the cruise. And so we actually had a module that was dedicated to harmful algal blooms. We had 2 people who are experts and specialists in harmful algal blooms come and via Zoom and Zoom us on while we were on the ship and talk to us, teach us about harmful algal blooms in more detail. And it was Evie Feshon from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and Thomas Ferrugia from Alaska Ocean Observing System, or AOOS. So that was really, really wonderful to have them engage with us and help us out and help us learn more about this. And some of the cores will be used towards harmful algal bloom like analysis and looking at cyst beds that could be in these cores. And then also the water samples, of course, were important for sending those off to Evie for further analysis as well for harmful algal blooms. Next slide. The last thing I want to say about that is we have this really wonderful dashboard about harmful algal blooms. While we were in transit on the ship, the IFCB is taking samples every 20 minutes and analyzing them. So on the map on the right, this is what the dashboard looks like. If you want to go, that's the website on the top of the screen. But every orange dot is showing basically every 20 minutes of our cruise. And I've selected one of those dots to show you that before we got, or right, I guess after we reached St. Paul Island, we were notified by Thomas and Evie that there was a potential harmful algal bloom happening. And that's because on the left, this is the IFC, this is the images that come from the IFCB during transit. And they noticed a type of phytoplankton that generally can and has caused harmful algal blooms. This is Alexandrium species, so I've highlighted those in yellow just to show you that while we were actually in transit, we were being notified and in constant communication with our experts, and they helped us kind of identify where we should be sampling and kind of when we should be sampling, and helped us to actually be proactive and very productive in helping them with analysis as we went. So, yeah.
Thanks, Jess.
All right.
Jackie, your turn.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the buoys that we deployed on the ship. And just before I get into the slide really fast, what they measure is wave height and a lot of different details surrounding waves, such as wave period, wave direction. They also were able to look at surface wind patterns and where the buoys are placed, and sea surface temperature and barometric pressure. One of the things in terms of convergence with these cruises, with this cruise, is that all of these buoys are on a open access app called Backyard Buoys. It's in conjunction with IUS associations, Indigenous and community partners, and ocean wave buoy developers and education. Essentially, what it is it simplifies data access for coastal communities and research efforts to complement Indigenous knowledge. And most of these buoys are on the app. Nome is on there, Hooper Bay is on there, St. Paul is on there, Akka and Chignik. The wave buoy at SIKULIAQ is currently missing. It's also not giving us data, and I've been in contact with Chris trying to figure out what's going on with that buoy. But the Nome buoy is on there if you are interested in being able to see like what wave heights are like at the in real time, sea surface temperature and things like that. The reason why these are particularly useful is they can also see things like with what happened in Halong. So if we move to the next slide. And an interesting aside about this is with the lack of observation in the Bering Sea, the National Weather Service actually used our action buoys to monitor wave heights during Typhoon Halong. And we were able to get real-time wave conditions. And in Nome, we were able to see when Halong hit, which is that spike there. And what's kind of interesting is it's not actually the strongest storm that went through, but it was still particularly devastating. The buoy itself is about 10 miles offshore, and it is at about 30 meters depth. But what's really useful about them is they can be used in terms like with Halong, we can use them for weather forecasting and creating better models for weather forecasting for local communities. Communities can also use them to get real-time data to be able to determine subsistence practices, the safety of going out for subsistence hunting, such as like going out for seal hunting or just fishing in general. They can see what the waves are what they are looking like, and is it safe to go out on their skiffs or not. And it's also useful, again, like I said, with weather forecasting. And so if the waves are coming really bad, they can try to have time for mitigation efforts to maybe slow down some of the flooding and storm surge. And yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackie. Last little thing that I'll touch on is I kind of led a module on oceanography, which I thought was really fun. That's what I do. And part of that was the wave buoys, but also we put out a couple ocean moorings that sit on the seafloor. So the wave buoys, because they're at the sea surface and they're going up and down with the waves, they can send their data in real time, and you can, go on the app and see what the waves are like. But that also means that if we have ice come in, that'll kind of destroy the buoys, so we don't really get a record through the winter. So we deployed a few ocean moorings that are sitting on the sea floor. They don't have any buoy at the top, so we don't get the data in real time. We're not going to get the data back until we pick these up next year. But we put them in these two locations shown by the red triangles. So one is kind of offshore of Hooper Bay and one is offshore of Gambell. And they're measuring ocean currents and wave parameters and then near seafloor temperature and salinity. And so this is a picture from when we deployed one of these on SIKULIAQ. And next year in the summer, we'll go pick them up and get the data and be able to say something about what was happening throughout the entire year. We also took lots of other samples on this cruise. I'm just going to mention one. We took some water samples for ocean acidification. And I'm mentioning that in part because Natalie Minacci said that she's going to give a Strait Science talk on December 4th, and she will give some updates about those samples. So I'm interested to see what she says as well. So what's next for the action project? Like I mentioned, we have a summer 2026 cruise. The specifics are still to be determined. There's been a lot of uncertainty with things like the government shutdown, but we're going to get out there somehow and have another cruise and hopefully recreate some similar things with some community visits and lots of different people communicating with each other on a cruise. And we're also planning to submit future National Science Foundation proposals to continue to fund cruises like this one. And one of the things we did on this cruise is we had an external evaluator come and kind of watch the whole process and do surveys and see if we were really able to achieve our goals. So she's working on kind of a full report, but I just pulled out a couple statistics she gave us. So one thing is 93% of respondents, so people on the cruise, agreed or strongly agreed that knowledge shared by community members during the community visits helped them to understand local priorities. And then the other one I picked out is 87% of respondents, again, these are all people that were on the cruise, agreed or strongly agreed that people talked about both community and traditional knowledge and science knowledge when planning research activities. So there's some things that we learned from that we'll try to improve into the future, but kind of big picture, I think we were really able to achieve our goals of bringing together people with different knowledge systems and different knowledge backgrounds and having them share and learn from each other. And with that, we can take any questions, and I put down quite a number of email addresses here if people want to follow up. So Chris Mayo, again, is the lead of the whole project, and then I put Matthew and myself, and Charla is the community research lead from Gambell, and Alex is our community research lead from ATCA. So thank you. Can take questions.
All right. Well, before we start with questions at Straight Science, what we do is we ask the audience to appreciate, like we do, thank you all of you, all our multiple speakers here that took time out, especially Morgen. I don't know, I can't see you right now, Morgen, but if you're still on, God bless you. And so throw a little love in the chat box. It's never easy to be a public speaker. It's never easy to start doing that at 10:30 at night and sound like you know what you're talking about. Well done. And so we really appreciate that. And so throw some love in the chat for our speakers, and then we'll do questions. And you can do that via the chat, or some people are skilled with raising their hand. And I don't think we have any callers at this point, so I will leave my cell phone out of it for the moment. All right. With that, any questions coming in? I've got some, but we'll let others go first. All right, then I'm going to go right off the bat. So what was the objective of going on a seal hunt?
Does anybody else want to chime in, or is this for me? Matthew, you got something to say? I mean, the objective was to hunt a seal, but we didn't we didn't achieve that one.
But there are, well, maybe we can talk offline, but there are some anyway, that's very interesting. So there
Yeah.
was no objective for going, just as an experience, or was that
Yeah,
the
it was a part of
drive?
culture sharing. So the
Culture
idea
sharing,
was that
okay.
our community leads, our community research leads from Gambell would show us how they hunt seals. So we had 3 different boats, and they were on a boat that was supposed to be the boat hunting the seal, and then we had 2 boats that were kind of watching. There were no, well, we saw a seal. There was no hunting of seals that actually occurred, so it was in the end more like we were out on 3 boats having a good time on a beautiful day offshore of Gambell. But yeah, the idea was that they would share their hunting practice with the other cruise participants.
Yeah, if I could jump in to build on that. So, I think one of the big highlights and takeaways for the cruise in general was, and we kind of brushed on this a little bit with the community visit slides, but the community to community exchange was very, very powerful on this cruise. So, we can come back to the seals, but like in Atkin, for example, where we participated, or where the reindeer hunt was held, um, on board the SIKULIAQ after the hunt, and that was a successful hunt. We actually butchered a caribou or a reindeer, and the practices of butchering the caribou between what Alex from ATCA was doing and Cayenne from Utqiagvik, how he butchered a caribou. There was like this cross uh, cultural exchange of like what the different practices were. So not only were, everybody on the ship was being involved and learning how to butcher the caribou, but the actual community to community exchange was super powerful as well. And that was brought up by a number of folks, the community partners, during the cruise, like how powerful it was for them to understand like how the fishing's done in Atkins versus Gambell. And so to answer your question, Gabe, like the seal hunt, that like what Kay said is absolutely spot on as far as the cultural engagement component of it, but it is also part of that culture exchange. And then one other important note is that, the hunters themselves were all indigenous. So we were careful to follow any sort of federal and state guidelines as far as biological sampling or hunting practices, while we might have been observing them as non-Indigenous participants, certainly not taking part in the hunt, if that's kind of what we're getting at here.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And that comes to mind because we sometimes have good, well-meaning peoples that come from afar, and things can happen that can get awkward. So I really appreciate you explaining that better, and what you were trying to do, which was, I guess, was observing some hunting. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew, and thanks, Gay. I just wanted to
Yep.
add in one kind of example of what Matthew said. Sam, who's from Nelson Lagoon, was on the cruise, and she was one of the people who was on the boat that was intended to be hunting a seal if we really were. And she was really interested because she was saying they have tons of seal in Nelson Lagoon and they don't hunt seal there. And she was, kind of saying like, what if, if we have a year that's really bad for salmon, like maybe it would be good if we have some knowledge about how we could hunt seals if that's like something that becomes important in the future. So there really was an aspect of sharing different practices from Indigenous people of different regions.
Wonderful. Where was that person from?
Nelson Lagoon.
Nelson Lagoon. All right, thank you so much. Rick, you've been so patient. The floor is yours.
All right, thanks everyone for all this great information, and really a lot of good stuff here to learn about what's involved here. I guess my question is, of course, ship time is precious. And if I understand correctly, this was a 16-day cruise. You covered a lot of ground in 16 days. And my question is, do you feel like that the project might have benefited or been different if you'd have chosen to spend more time at fewer communities and less transit time? Or do you feel like that was an important part of this summer's expedition? Thanks.
That's a really good question. I'll give a couple thoughts, and then anybody else who wants to chime in, please do. Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely would have been different. And one thing a lot of people on the cruise said at the end was that they wish that there'd been more time, like things, even though it was 16 days, felt, rushed at times. So I think there definitely could be a case made for visiting maybe one or two communities and spending more time in each area. We spent about like 36 to 48 hours in the region of each community, but I mean, I think that certainly could have been longer and might be one way to do things moving forward.
Great, thank you.
Add a little bit more. Yeah, Rick, I mean, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. As Kay mentioned, we're already looking at next year. So we do have a second year of cruise ship time in our project, and we're actively looking at additional proposals for repeating this. And that is, I think, the heart of the question is, what is that balance? Because as Kay said, like it was across the board, the feedback from the cruise participants was that just wasn't enough time in the communities. But we need to balance that with the ship time itself. It's very expensive. And to give you an idea, one of the things that we really didn't mention here in this presentation, but during the community visits, the ship was very seldom idle. It wasn't necessarily just docked at port waiting for us to come back on. We were conducting bathymetry surveys. We were doing sediment cores. We were doing CTDs while we were doing our shore leave parties. So we really tried. I mean, we were burning the wick at both ends here on this cruise between the short time and the ship time. But I think you're really you're underlying a very important part there is like, what is that sweet spot of community visits versus ship time? And I think that's something that we're going to be looking at here in the near future.
Great, thanks.
All right. Jana Pierce, I see your hand is up. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Well, just adding on because thank you for the presentation. I loved watching it and hearing about it and seeing the photos. But in answer to sort of in response to Rick's question, you know, through this project, we do spend a lot of time in these same communities. I think Matthew and Morgan, you were in the Chigniks for how long this summer?
About 3 weeks.
3 weeks. So it's not that we're not spending time in these communities, but that I definitely also understand the people on the ship wanting to spend longer in each community and what that, you know, trying to find that balance. But I just want to point out that we are spending time in these communities in addition to what happened on the cruise.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Thanks.
Any other questions? I've got kind of a question too, another one. Not like the seal hunting question. That was what my ears went up on that because that's kind of a spooky thing if you're, but it was okay. So it's interesting to me because you're so wide spread. So Gulf of Alaska, Aleutians, Caribs, YK, Bering Strait. Sounds like you go all the way to Canada. So for each of those communities, they are in either a borough, like the North Slope Borough or the Northwest Arctic Borough or the Bristol Bay Borough or the Eastern Aleutian Borough or the Bering Strait region. We're an unorganized borough. And each one of those, at least for the Western, I don't know about Gulf of Alaska at all, but for the Western and Northern communities, we have hubs, regional communication and transportation hubs. And so a lot of information's going on, and we are definitely a diverse, at least speaking for the Bering Strait region, we are ethnically very diverse within the region. We have the University of Alaska Fairbanks in all hub communities, with the exception of Utqiagvik, because they have Ilisavik, which is their tribal college, North Slope Boroughs Tribal College. And I'm wondering, you know, what you guys were experiencing is often life, which in Western and Northern Alaska, which is the warp and weave of culture sharing and solving problems and all that. How does your project interact with the university or with the, if not available, like Canada wouldn't have, I don't know Canada's situation at all, but how do you interact with the hub communities? I mean, we're so grateful you're here tonight to sort of show us what for us happened at Gambell, and hopefully we'll get the results. Hopefully you'll be back with the results of the IFCB or the sediment coring or the networking that's going on between Nelson Lagoon and Gambell. Well, so I guess it's twofold. One, we want to hear the results, and two, so I guess we want you back. And two is, how does this project work with the regional hub communities that are doing, you know, all that we do? How do you guys interact? Because we're kind of communication, transportation, and in some cases governmental hubs.
Matthew, you want to go for that one? Yeah.
I can go for this one. Feel free to jump in, anybody. Yeah, Gay. I mean, that's such an important question, and you know, when we were writing this proposal, that was something that really stuck out to us as well. Is that there's already so many entities, like you mentioned Sea Grant at the top of this talk here, and the support that they're doing for the series, and you know, Sea Grant has been an instrumental partner on the project, and everything from advisory board members being on the Sea Grant to really modeling. I mean, the community research lead position that we have has really been modeled after the Sea Grant map agents. So we kind of took a page out of the book of like trying to really you know, promote that type of methodology where like the community research lead is in the community themselves. So to kind of get back to your question of how are we engaging with the hubs, we have some work to do on that. So right now we are actively engaged with the Bristol Bay campus. We've put out a couple courses that have been offered through that campus, and we would really like to start working with the other regional hubs around the state, not just within Nome, but at the YK Delta, the Kuskokwim campus, and you know, ideally, throughout the state, including the Southeast. You mentioned a lot of the geographies, and that's one glaring gap within the coastal cooperative as far as community partners goes. So long story short, we're just getting started on this, and we want to start partnering more and more with the university hubs, and just finding these areas where it makes sense to collaborate there. We don't want to duplicate efforts. We recognize that there's amazing work that's going on right now in these regions, and would love to kind of dovetail our work into what's already going on.
Thank you so much. That's great. All right. Sean Hayes, you are hopefully, don't worry about finding your hand raising skills or showing those off. Just unmute and the floor is yours. That'll be on the lower left. There should be a little microphone.
Thanks, Kay. I appreciate it, and really
Got it.
appreciate the presentation. You all, as a fellow UAF alumni, y'all are near and dear to my heart. And I am so excited when I see these type of data collections and experience collections occur. And I think, I guess, two-part question. Being involved with a lot of these sort of community engagements and the foundation of convergence, I guess, what would have been any, or if you saw a trend in some of the priorities coming from these villages and communities that you identified as you made your cruise? Was there like one resounding theme that was a concern or a priority as you were interacting with them?
A big one that came out for kind of the Bering Sea region was harmful algal blooms. I'll let other people chime in with things they noticed.
I wasn't on the cruise itself, but I know whenever we would do planning meetings before the cruise, erosion was a big thing as well.
Yeah.
I'll also. Oh,
Go ahead, Jess. Go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, so just two of the communities at Kent and Gambell were also interested in military contamination, and that's what we were really focusing on for the sediment and water sampling. So I know that was a concern for at least two of our communities.
Yeah, and so Sean, thank you for the question there. And the vision and process itself started, basically day one of this project starting, which is about 2 years ago, almost to the date. I think November 14th, 2023. At any rate, so that through that process, there were a lot of similarities between the communities as far as priority goes. And I mentioned the one was the engagement with the youth. So what that looked like might be different in each of the communities, but there was an overwhelming desire for youth engagement of some sort for every single one of the communities. Erosion, as Jackie mentioned, that is definitely a big item that came out of this. And in fact, the proposal, a lot of the language that was in our original proposal centered around erosion. One of the things that surprised, I think, a lot of us, even like the community partner PIs on the project, was the extent of which language and cultural revitalization has come up as far as the priorities of the communities. That wasn't something that was really we didn't really lean into on the proposal, but certainly is something that we're pivoting and leaning into on this. So that entails, not just efforts to, build up a dictionary or something, but like with our scientific products, for example, we're making a genuine effort to incorporate indigenous place names and terms into the literature itself. So that's just those are a couple of the highlights that jumped out at me as far as the visioning process goes.
No, great feedback all around. Appreciate it. I think you guys are in the right spot. UAF is at the heart of the Language Center and DGGS with all of our data analytics on erosion and permafrost degradation. So I am looking forward to seeing whatever is on the horizon and for next year. My second part for that two-part question was, what would be your single most professional and personal takeaway from your time out there on the cruise this season?
All right, I'll be brave and go first. I think professionally, so the braided surveying module that Morgan and I spoke to, I think for me professionally was the highlight. That I'm a geographer by training, so I'm like used to understanding like or incorporating different disciplines into a way of knowing, but that module in particular, I learned so much from everybody on the cruise as far as them bringing in their own pieces of ways of understanding and ways of knowing, and like that really culminated for me, like solidified exactly what this project is about. It was just like a microcosm for the larger action project for me personally, and it was really incredible to go through that for the 16 days with a cohort of cruise participants. Personal level, there were some pretty darn amazing sunsets on board the SIKULIAQ and some rather cool wildlife sightings that I haven't seen before.
Yeah, I can chime in quickly. This kind of goes to Rick's question, I guess. Maybe I'm a little bit of a nerd with this, but I kind of like planning cruises and something I've done a little bit of, but I'd never planned a cruise where it was like, and then we're gonna go to shore and we're gonna do all these things and everybody's gonna be back by 4 p.m. So then we can like have dinner at 5 and then we're gonna do sediment coring at 6 and also like, break down this reindeer and just the like level of challenge, I think, of planning all of this was really fun for me. And then on a personal level, I mean, I learned a ton, particularly from our community research leads. There was a picture somewhere on one of our slides, but something I thought was super cool is George, who's from Gambell, was literally explaining to the captain of SIKULIAQ like where he should pull SIKULIAQ up and which beach would be better to take a small boat to based on the wave forecast and the weather forecast. And it was just like so great to actually see like the crew of the ship and Western scientists and indigenous knowledge holders and social scientists all coming together and having a great cruise and having a lot of fun out there too.
All right. Anyone else in your group want to say what was, I can't remember what it was phrased as, but professionally unexpected or memorable or a highlight? That's okay. You don't have to. All right. With that, any other questions or no hands raised? Then we'll say thank you. If your team wants to stay after everyone tunes off, that might be good. And except for Megan, go to bed. Go to bed. But anyway, she's welcome to stay on, but it's very late for her right now. We really appreciate that extra effort. So Strait Science, the next Strait Science was already mentioned. That will be December 4th. We have, because of the furlough, we've had a cancellation and they can't come back fast enough to get back on. So we are the next Strait Science will be December 4th, and we will learn about ocean acidification and what it is, an introduction to it, and what the latest results are for our region and what it might mean especially for our crab and clams. So, and other invertebrates we have in the region that we all rely on. With that, thank you so much, the action program team, and we'll say goodnight to everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. We'll see you December 4th.